everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is one of my first videos, and I wanted to talk to you about something that I'm very passionate about, and that is gluten. I hate it. One of my biggest pet peeves is people thinking that this recent change in everyone's eating habits or giving up gluten is a fad. And in fact, it's really not a fad. It's something that I believe is going to be around for a long time, and something that I hope that more places will start adopting, using more gluten-free options. So I just want to explain a little bit what it is and why it has an effect on certain people and not others. So first of all, gluten is what you find in wheat, barley, rye, primarily wheat. You really can't find wheat without gluten in it, unfortunately. I know they make it. I know there's certain special farms that have it, but it's very, very hard to come by. But the wheat that we eat today is so different than the wheat that our grandparents and maybe sometimes even our parents ate. I think a lot of people question why all of a sudden everybody thinks that they have a gluten allergy or a gluten sensitivity. And it really isn't. It isn't that we want to have it. It's not like, oh, I think that I want to draw attention to myself and be a pain in the ass every time I go to a restaurant and order something, or have to go to people's houses for dinner and then not be able to eat what they cook. Like, that is so embarrassing. You literally want to crawl under a table. It's not something, if I could choose, if I was going to choose something to get rid of for just the sake of being an annoying person and having this allergy, it would be sugar. I mean, I'm not a small girl, so I could stand to give up sugar. That would be much more beneficial in making me, a lot slimmer. Gluten, some people, it makes them slimmer, some people not, and I'm one of those people not. But anyway, the gluten that we use today has been so genetically modified from the gluten that they used back in the 1950s. And if you read Dr. Davis's book, Wheat Belly, you learn that gluten was actually created. The wheat was originally genetically modified to try and put a dent in world hunger. By putting gluten in foods, it actually makes it basically, by putting gluten in foods or genetically modifying it to have gluten in it, it started producing 5 times more yield per acre. So they were able to grow a lot more of it. And they thought, wow, maybe we can use this to help end world hunger and send to third world countries. But there really wasn't any testing on how that affected us humans. So there's your answer for that. The reason everyone hasn't always had these sensitivities and allergies to gluten is because gluten hasn't always been what it is today. And so you don't have to test positive for celiac to have an issue with gluten. I had a negative test for celiac disease, which actually I've heard a lot of people have false negatives. People can have just a gluten sensitivity, and so it's kind of frustrating when you go to restaurants and people say, is it an allergy or a sensitivity? Well, for me, I still have a really violent reaction when I have it, even though I'm not technically considered to have an allergy. So think about it this way: when you take flour and water and mix it together, what do you get? Glue. So that's what we're doing when we're eating things with the flour of today with this gluten in it. It makes the flour more moldy, and that's why bakers love it, because they're able to do all these fantastic, create these magical things out of wheat, out of flour, out of bread, because it molds together, it binds together. That's all gluten is like a binding agent, like a glue. And so you think about it traveling through your intestines and through your gut, that's going to affect some people, and it affects a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So the best way I know to describe it, and I wish I had props for you, is, so think of your gut as like cheesecloth, okay? So only little tiny things can get through, but the rest of the things, like things that turn into your BM, that's not going to get through, because cheesecloth has really, really teeny tiny holes. Well, the way your body gets its nutrients is it absorbs those nutrients through your intestines when you eat the food. So the nutrients, I guess, are little tiny particles that will go through the cheesecloth and go into your bloodstream. But because gluten is like glue going through your intestines, for some people it starts to rip that cheesecloth. And it also has a protein in it called zonulin, I think is how you say it. And that also just naturally makes the holes in the gut lining or the cheesecloth bigger. Well, what happens when those holes get bigger, more things seep through the holes, things that shouldn't be there. And so what's happening is part of the gluten, or for some people, maybe it's egg or maybe it's milk, these things start to leak through and your body sees it as a foreign object and it automatically sends antibodies there and it attacks it because it shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be coming through that gut to begin with. And so that's how allergies and sensitivities are created. I don't know if you've heard of leaky gut syndrome or candida or candidiasis. That's what that is. It's something is causing the lining of your intestines, which should have little tiny holes like cheesecloth. Something's causing the, I guess, permeability, the tightness of that cheesecloth to loosen up, and it's allowing bigger things to get through. And unfortunately, the content, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm not using the right words here probably, but the thing that protein or cells that make up gluten resemble a lot of the cells in our body, like the thyroid. And so your body registers once your gut expands those holes and those things start leaking through and those antibodies are sent, your body recognizes that, just like with an illness. That's how you get the flu shot, and they're giving you part of the flu and your body recognizes that as a bad thing. Let's attack it. Let's send antibodies there. So it's sending antibodies to attack the gluten or whatever's leaking out of your gut, and a lot of times those cells resemble other things in our body like the thyroid. So now your body thinks your thyroid is also a foreign object. And here we are, this gluten, it's leaking through the intestine, and gluten also attacks the good bacteria in the gut. And so this, in a nutshell, is what causes autoimmune disorder. Because anytime your body starts to attack its own cells, that's considered autoimmune. And there's such a huge variety of different autoimmune disorders, and they affect everybody in such a different way. But hopefully this helps you understand a little bit that it's not just people choosing to not eat gluten. It could be that people had other problems for years that manifested in different ways, presented with different illnesses, different pains, and they didn't know that gluten was causing a lot of that until they gave up gluten. And it's recommended that you give it up for at least 30 days and then reintroduce it into the body, and a lot of times you can see then how it's affecting you. And for me, it was a lot of joint pain, back pain, a rash. Sometimes I get a rash when I accidentally have it. But with all the things that happen for people who are sensitive or allergic to gluten, you've now opened up, autoimmune possibilities. And when you have autoimmune, your body naturally doesn't defend off illness, disease, as well as it would if you're healthy. And again, your body is also not able to absorb the nutrients from the food because now it's looking at all that as the bad guy, as the enemy. And so some of the things, just a few of the things that you get for people who have a susceptibility, sensitivity, allergy to gluten, bone pain, joint pain, like I said, autoimmune. Crohn's disease is a really big one for people who aren't supposed to have gluten. Chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, which is also autoimmune, epilepsy. I had a lot of seizures growing up, and they never could figure out why. And I actually, now that I think about it, haven't had any seizures since I quit eating gluten over 5 years ago. Liver disease, thyroid disease, brain fog, fatigue, depression. They've actually linked having a gluten allergy or sensitivity to early onset dementia and Alzheimer's, forgetfulness, anemia. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Like, there's so many things. Oh, even type 1 diabetes. I could go on and on about all the ways people are affected. And, gluten is not something that you can just cut down. the tiniest little granule of gluten for someone, which is up to 40% of the population actually, but the tiniest little bit can cause any of these reactions in people, and it may be different every time. And so sometimes, you know, if I go to someone's house or I'm out to eat and the waiter accidentally puts a piece of bread on my plate, I feel like a total bitch because I have to send it back. I don't want to send it back. I don't want to draw attention to myself. I don't want to be that person that everybody's just rolling their eyes, but it's that important to me that I not have it ever by accident, and I certainly never have it on purpose. So it's not like, oh, you can just have one little bite. Or even with cheesecake, sometimes people are like, well, can't you just eat the filling? No, you can't. Because one little tiny microbial cell of gluten gets into that filling and you eat it, you never know what kind of reaction you're gonna have. So anyway, that is the video I felt compelled to share with you today. I know that it can be confusing, and I just hope, even if it helps one person understand it more, or better yet, if it helps one person decide to give up gluten, that would make me so happy. I encourage you to go to wheatbelly.com. I am affiliated with them in no way whatsoever, but it helped me to really understand the impact that gluten can have, and I wish everybody would give it up. The food of today is so much different, and not in a good way, than the food that our parents and grandparents ate. So anyway, thank y'all so much for joining. This was fun. I think this is my first like official YouTube video.